As promised yesterday, we are going to go through the results from the survey on cash refresh and 2-day regionals. Now, I posted a link to the survey for you all to do almost a week ago, and even though the video that asked for you to do the survey got 624 views, all I got were just 95 responses from the survey. Tisk tisk, very disappointing. Not every one of you went to do the survey. Just kidding. For those of you who actually took some time off to do the survey, thank you very much. A sincere thank you. Because without you, I wouldn't have been able to get this many responses, and this survey actually allowed me to paint a very interesting picture on what the public opinion is regarding cash refresh and 2-day regionals. So let's get into the results. But first, let's get the demographics straight, because depending on who you ask these questions, you'll get very different answers. The demographic for this particular survey was split between you wonderful YouTube viewers, as well as Netrunner players who frequent the the Netrunner subreddit, I should say. So yeah, if you were to ask, for example, the more competitive community, I usually hang out in Slack, and the UK Netrunner Slack community in general is probably considered more competitive. If you ask these questions to them, we'll probably get a very different result. But back to this. With that in mind, let's see the questions and the answers. So the first question was, what issues do you have with 2-day regionals as opposed to 1-day regionals? And the results are shown here. So first thing we notice is that there is nearly 10% of players who answered this survey that don't do regionals at all. Maybe they find it too competitive, or maybe the regionals available for them are just too far away. Either way, this is an important demographic to note. Even though it's not a big demographic by any means, it is statistically significant. So if you're FFG and you want to, you know, target events for players, you must note that there are players out there who don't do tournaments that much but still buy the products, or at least play some Netrunner themselves. For the rest of the demographic, they are split evenly between players who have no issues with 2-day tournaments and players who have time issues. Now, time issues is by far overwhelmingly the biggest issue with 2-day regionals. Most players have commitments, have other things to do in their life besides Netrunner, so committing an entire weekend to netrunning is often a bit too much. Now, even though I formulated the survey such that these are binary decisions, you either have time issues or you don't have time issues, in reality it's often a mix of the two. You're somewhere in between. As one person who completed the survey pointed out, sometimes, in certain weeks, for example, there might be events on, like you might have a gig, a concert, or maybe you are attending, you have Father's Day, you have family you have to take care and stuff. So for these players, sometimes if regionals clash with certain events, they won't be able to attend. But otherwise, if the regionals falls on a free weekend, they can attend the 2-day regionals. So your mileage may vary, but in general, this graph provides a very good representation of the percentage of players that will not attend your tournament due to time commitments, and it's a fairly significant one. What about distant regionals? These are regionals that are far away, so far that you probably have to book accommodation in the area because traveling there is a long distance. For such regionals, it turns out that the players who have no issues attending distant regionals are a lot less. Previously, it was about 45% that didn't mind attending 2-day regionals. Now, with distant regionals as opposed to nearby regionals, it shrinks all the way down to the last 15% on the right. That's a very small percentage of players that can afford to travel that far for tournaments, and you would think that these are the most competitive players in the community, those that want to attend tournaments no matter how far they are. The biggest issue with distant tournaments is now money issues. At a whopping over 50% actually have issues with money, and that's pretty obvious if you have to book accommodations or such far travel plans. Most people just cannot keep up or cannot justify the cost of traveling to such a faraway regionals. Now, one very significant minority, even though they are a very small group, but still statistically significant, is these four players here, who actually indicated in the survey that they are actually willing to travel for cash refresh. Um, yeah, so that's quite big. So to answer the question, does cash refresh motivate people to attend tournaments they otherwise wouldn't attend? The answer is yes, but it's a very small proportion. This is good news. The bad news is that obviously this small proportion is vastly outweighed by the players in the previous slide that would not attend a cash refresh tournament because it's 2 days long and cannot afford the time to attend these tournaments. So yeah, quite interesting results there. Next question I asked was, does cash refresh enhance your regional experience? A good 3/4 of respondents said yes, having cash refresh actually made regionals more enjoyable, more fun, and this is a very, very good sign. I wasn't really sure what to expect asking this question to the general public, but from what I see, a lot of people actually do like the introduction of cash refresh, and it indicates to me that even though you might not be getting more regional attendance, in fact, regional attendance might decrease due to it being 2 days, but for those people who are attending, the enjoyment factor goes up, and that is still a good sign in my opinion, because playing games is all about fun. Among those who said no, um, roughly half of them say they do not enjoy cash refresh, and as a result, their experience at regionals is not enhanced. And for the other half, this half here, they say that it doesn't matter. It wouldn't enhance my experience because I wouldn't be attending day two anyway. So for some players, they might sign up for a 2 day regionals but only attend the first day, knowing they are not good enough to make the cut, but would miss out on the second day and hence miss out on cash refresh as well due to it being 2 days. So this is actually an important downside to cash refresh. The fact that you need 2 days to play out, or rather, the fact that you need to attend the second day means that some players simply can't afford the time to enjoy cash refresh, and that's a pity. I asked a pretty similar question following that. Does cash sorry, wrong question here. The question is, do you like the cash refresh format? Again, 3/4 of the respondents say yes and 24% say no. So let's look at those who said no and the reasons behind not liking cash refresh. The two biggest reasons for not liking cash refresh are that the metagame's imbalance, a sentiment shared by more than half of the respondents who said no, and that building different decks is a hassle. Again, more than half of the respondents said so. Personally, I fall into this category here. Um, I think preparing for a regional tournament is taxing as it is, having to consider the metagame of the standard tournament, but having to build another 2 decks in addition just to participate in cash refresh is a big downside. I don't have the time to build that many decks, let alone practice these cash refresh decks. So to me, yeah, this is a strong disincentive for the cash refresh format. I would much rather play another format, say draft, where you can just turn up without needing to build any decks or think about the meta. Just open your draft packs and draft from there, build your deck as you go. I would much prefer such a format. Moving on, the less cited reasons for not liking cash refresh format is that the bidding aspect is not very good. About a third or 40% of players say so, and this is actually quite significant. The bidding aspect is admittedly a bit clunky, so I can see why people would say this. Another reason is that the smaller card pool leads to a less diverse meta. Some people enjoy diversity in metas, and right now the standard format is at its peak in diversity compared to previously. Yeah, the standard format has never been more diverse in my opinion, and going to cash refresh, I can see it being less diverse due to the smaller card pool. Finally, there's a very small fraction that say that they are purists and they would only like the standard format. I imagine there would actually be more respondents who would take this option, but turns out it's just a very small minority. Other reasons that are cited by the wonderful people who completed my survey. Firstly, There are many problem cards that have been released in the Flashpoint and Red Sand cycle, so they are part of the cache refresh format. This is actually a rather significant problem as well, compared to the earlier data packs where the power level was more controlled. In Flashpoint and Red Sands, you have power levels that could be all over the place, and this kind of puts a dent in the enjoyment factor of the cache refresh format because, yeah, people enjoy playing a format where cards don't swing the game that much, and CTM, Temujin are just examples of cards that go against that. So I can see not liking cache refresh because of this. Another reason is imbalance again. Runners incredibly favored, and that the bidding system doesn't do enough to compensate this. I don't think the bidding system was ever meant to compensate the runner called imbalance. It's simply meant to determine sides since cache refresh is a single Swiss format. But yeah, this is a good point. Next, yeah, the format of cache refresh in the context of regionals is such that players who are eliminated from the top card can still join in cache refresh, and they are compensated for this by being given a perfect record -1 when they are joined in. And this could be a problem because if you join in cache refresh really late, it could be the case that you just take home the entire tournament just by winning a single cache refresh game at the end. This could be a problem, admittedly. And yeah, there's no good way of solving this without excluding the top card players from joining cache refresh. It's an inherent flaw. I can see this. This is a very good point. Finally, cache refresh is not palatable because Netrunner is complex enough and additional time is required to get your head around this different card pool. This is something that resonates very strongly with me. Besides the complexity of the hassle of having to build multiple decks for cache refresh at regionals, I also have to consider the card pool and what's strong and what's weak, and have to keep in mind that most of the cards that I'm used to in standard play are not legal in this cache refresh format. I will admit that this is a big reason for me as well why I don't really like cache refresh. But these are the negatives. Let's move on to the positives, which receive far more responses because obviously a lot more people enjoyed the format than otherwise. So let's see. By far, almost 100%, almost all the respondents admitted that they enjoy cache refresh because of the different decks. This is the number one reason why cache refresh was so welcome, and I think this reflects something very interesting. I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions on this, but to me what this indicates is that people generally do not like stagnant games, or solve games for that matter. I think there is some degree of frustration when try-hard players decide to converge on a single deck that they call the best deck, and when everyone keeps saying that it's the best deck that is unbeatable. People don't like that. People just like playing different decks and having them be viable. This is why there's also a good proportion of players, around 40%, nearly half, that say that they like cache refresh because it's less competitive. Now, this is just my own conclusion that I draw from this data. It may not necessarily reflect what people actually think, but yeah, you can feel free to interpret this in your own way. Another important thing which I think cache refresh was very good at was increasing price support. More than half of the respondents indicate that they like cache refresh because of the additional prizes offered at regionals, and this is a big deal. I think it's very important that prizes be offered if you are trying to, grow a player base, cultivate a meta, and get people interested in the game. I know when I first played Netrunner that the main reason that I got into competitive play was because I started winning stuff, doing well, winning stuff, getting all these swag, tokens, playmats, all arts. There's this, dopamine rush that you feel when you win something, and people want to experience that. And cache refresh provides an avenue for that. So regardless of what new format you use, I think prizes are very important, and this is something that FFG Organized Play hit on the head by providing unique playmats that are not available with the standard format, and this is actually quite important in my opinion. And this survey clearly reflects that. Diversity is also important for some people. This is rather ironic because we mentioned earlier that the smaller card pool probably leads to less diversity. But I think this point kind of feeds into the less competitive aspect. If the meta is less competitive, it is in general, what will happen is that people will tend to um, not stick to the norm because there is no norm per se. If there's no competitive hive mind, there won't be a norm. There won't be one best deck, so decks tend to be more diverse. The lesser reasons for liking Cash Refresh are that it has a lower buy-in. There's a very small but significant minority that state that they do not have all the cards, they do not own all the cards in the card pool, the standard card pool. So having a lower buy-in in the Cash Refresh format really helps. That way they can just buy the big boxes they like for the factions that they love, as well as the two later cycles, and they can get up to speed with Cash Refresh. This is actually quite important for cultivating a new player base. Finally, there's also a small number of respondents who believe that the format is more balanced. I can't really comment on whether Cash Refresh is more or less balanced than the standard format, so, take it for what you will. Other reasons why people like this Cash Refresh format. The lower buy-in is not just valuable for new players, but for some people even for people who own the entire card pool, it's valuable to them socially. They get a platform with which to interact with new players who don't own the entire card pool. And this is very, very important. It's something that I didn't provide as an option for my survey, but I'm glad that this person who filled in my survey brought this up. The social aspect of a tournament that encourages newbies is very important, and I think a lot of people will agree with this as well. So this is a very, very insightful comment. Big kudos to whoever brought this up. Ultra fast rotation is another reason to like Cash Refresh. The fact that the metagame will refresh very, very quickly. I think this ties into the different decks sentiment. You like Cash Refresh because you get to see different decks, and ultra fast rotation means that decks will change that much quicker. Some people like the bidding system. Some people like the fact that the card pool is smaller, meaning that it's easier to keep up with the card pool. Some people like the back to basics element. And the last reason actually, is a bit iffy in my opinion. Some people think that Cash Refresh is better or rather they like it more because the metagame is explored less, and that it poses a deck building challenge to the players involved. Now, again, I think going back to the point I mentioned earlier, these all boil down to the fact that Cash Refresh is less appealing to competitive players who would rather play the standard format, simply because new cards, upcoming cards are designed with the standard format in mind. The game will be balanced around the standard format, not Cash Refresh. As such, with Cash Refresh being a generally less competitive format, obviously this means that the metagame will be explored less, and that and this feeds into this, because if people don't really spend time and effort into finding the best deck for Cash Refresh, it will be more of a deck building challenge. But it's a rather irrelevant point, because I think the standard format, if anything, provides a bigger deck building challenge, because you have more cards at your disposal, and you actually have a clear idea of what the strongest decks are. So you actually have a goal in mind when embarking on this so-called deck building challenge. And if your enjoyment of Cash Refresh stems from the fact that it's less competitive, well, it has its ups and downs, but I think it's quite important to recognize that this is more due to the fact that this format is less competitive, or rather attracts fewer competitive players, rather than the fact that the format itself is really good or encourages really diverse different play. It's more of a product of the players involved in the Cash Refresh community, more so than the format itself. This is something important, I think, that we need to make distinct from each other. So those are the conclusions I've drawn from my survey results. You might draw different conclusions from it too, and that's all fine and dandy, because the way I worded certain questions and the way I worded certain options might lead to players responding differently. And so we have to be very aware of the inherent biases that the construction of the survey might provide. But in general, to close off, what I feel I've learned from this survey are as such. Firstly, Cache refresh pushing regionals to 2 days instead of 1 may have inadvertently decreased regionals attendance. This is a downside, which is not very fortunate and might not be a good thing going into future regionals in future years. However, as a fresh format, remember, as a new format that draws a different crowd to it compared to the usual competitive Netrunner community, cache refresh is well received in general, and this is a good thing. It's a nice change of scenery from the standard meta where strong decks are identified very quickly. However, the downside is that it may or may not be in balance. I'm not sure about this. This might not be true. The 50-50 things are that the deck building aspect of cache refresh can be a double-edged sword. On one hand, it might provide a new deck building challenge for players who are seeking a new challenge. On the other hand, the deck building can come as a bane to players who are preparing for regionals and don't have time to build two separate sets of decks. So yeah, that's what I feel about cache refresh and the survey results. What do you think? Leave a comment in the comment section. In the meantime, as always, thanks for watching and thanks for supporting me in doing the survey. In the meantime, thanks for watching and happy night running. Goodbye.